Hello guys and welcome again to my channel. So we are already at process costing. Congratulations again by the way um, if you have been at the very beginning up until now. So in the last meeting we started the process costing as well as the concepts. So let's have a recap a little bit. So when we talk about process costing, you already know number one thing that this process costing is for companies or manufacturing entities that are mass producing homogeneous products. And this is very much in reverse with the job order costing, which is on the job order costing, those are for manufacturing entities um, giving customized products to the customers based on their unique specifications. That's number one. Number two that we've talked about in the past episode is that on the process costing, the question is usually where are these costs, the raw material cost, the direct labor, and the factory overhead. And if ever there is a work in process beginning, of course, the work in process beginning has been partially completed. So that means there are already direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead that were applied to it. Although it's only a portion because it's not yet complete. Now, where does those costs go? Of course, they are going to the departments. So the homogeneous products are actually going through a process before it can be completed, which is why it is processed per department, and each department has different responsibilities. And we've talked about an example, which is a canned tuna company. So there is a department one, which is its responsibilities is for cleaning and cutting the fishes, and the second one, the department number two, is used for packaging, something like that. So they have their own responsibilities in processing the homogeneous products. Okay? Now, third, when you are in a certain department, you have to realize that this particular department will have its own direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Okay? And then sometimes it has a work in process. And again, work in process entails that there is already a direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead applied to it, partially. Okay? Now, the question is, what will happen to that within the department? Of course, it can only be at the end, completed and transferred. Those costs will go to the completed and transferred. Some will go to the work in process. And if ever there are partially completed units during the current month of a certain department, and sometimes there would be some that will be allocated to losses. Okay? So that is only this completed and transferred meant that it is only completed as to the responsibilities of Department 1. Okay? Now, I told you, I will insert this. I told you that the accounting for this one is actually to be accounted for versus the accounted for, something like that. It's the easiest way to envision what is the purpose of process costing as well as in the accounting in general. And sometimes I use the terms before and after analysis. We could have before, the cost is like this, direct materials now, direct labor, factory overhead, and the work in process costs. And then the after, it will be like this, before and after analysis. It depends on what you want. You could have to be accounted for and as accounted. Okay? Now, related to this, related to this completed and transferred, that is termed as such because if ever Department 1 completes its products, the department will transfer it to the subsequent department, the completed and transferred. And not just the units, the physical units of products, but also the record, the number of units, as well as the cost here that were assigned, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead of this completed and transferred. So, sometimes in the books, this completed and transferred is termed as transferred out goods. Those transferred out goods is the cost of the transferred out units. And if we are in the point of view of Department 2, that will become transferred in cost. Okay? So that means the costs are transferable from one department to another department, and that also means that on the Department 2 will not just compute its own costs, because as you know, Department 2, for example, has its own direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. It has its own work in process also, which has a direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead also. Department 2 will not just compute based on the current cost that it has. Okay? It will also compute for the cost that were transferred to it by Department 1, the transferred in cost. So not only the direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead, there is also transferred in cost for the Department 2. And you have to remember that. So this completed and transferred and the transferred in cost sa subsequent department are actually related. Okay? And the cost accumulates and accumulates. Like for example, the completed or transferred of Department 1 will go to Department 2 and it will become completed and transferred also by Department 2. That will be transferred to Department 3 if there is. So Department 3 is not only managing its own costs again, it will manage also the transferred in cost from Department 2, which is again the transferred in cost from Department 2 already includes the transferred in cost from Department 1. Right? So the cost is getting bigger and bigger until the end. If the Department 3 is the end department, you will already have the accumulated cost of the actual finished goods. Because if Department 3 is the final department, its completed units is the real finished goods or cost of goods manufactured. Okay? So it's cost accumulation per department. This is very unlike the job order costing, because on the job order costing, you will not transfer cost from job to job. What's the cost of the job? It's the cost of the job only. It will not be uh, you will not add anything from job 2, from job 3 if you are in job 1. Okay? So I hope that's clear. And we ended up having this illustrative problem. Let me see if it's still recording. Okay, 7 minutes. However, I have put something else. It's not only a recap, right? I have put other information. So it's okay. It's 7 minutes is okay. Okay? Now let's have this one. In the past episode, we have this illustrative problem. And of course, I did not write it immediately. I wrote it bit by bit so that you'll be able to know what's my process of thinking and to make it more natural if ever. So, this is our problem. So, we are in Department 1 of Baby G Tuna Company, and this is the information about the Department 1. So, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead is here. So, 400, 750, 450,000. And then 60% is the application rate of the applied factory overhead based on the direct labor. Again, the direct materials is 400,000, direct labor 750,000, factory overhead 450,000, which is clearly, if you compute, it's 60% of the 750,000. So these are the current costs incurred by Department 1 in an attempt to make all the goods that is being processed by the department to be finished. Attempt only. Okay? Now, in this attempt, this work in process beginning was also part of the attempt. We have to finish this if we are in Department 1. Although this work in process beginning has been started already in the past period, so it's completed 30% as to direct materials, 35% as to direct labor, and 35% as to factory overhead. And these are the costs. So 22,500 for direct materials, 47,000 for direct labor, and 28,200, which is 60% of the direct labor. So that is the partial costs that were applied to the work in process beginning. Let me repeat that again. This is only partially completed. Okay? So, this, if you consider these direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead incurred during the current month, this is an effort also to finish this. And actually, there are two groups. We have here, started during the year. So this is started last year but unfinished. And this is started during the year. So actually, these direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead costs are efforts in order to finish these two groups. Okay? The started during the year or the current period, and this that was started in the past but were never finished. Okay? So this is the effort. You consider this. Imagine, this is the effort to finish this and this. Okay? You have been given information what happened after the efforts are given to finish this and that group. So as accounted, we have 19,000 that were finished by Department 1, which is also considered completed and transferred or transferred out cost. That's the same. Okay? Now, unfortunately, 19,000 units was finished, so which means there is a work in process end. Okay? Those that were not finished. Because as you can see, you have processed 20,000 started and 3,000 partially completed. So that's 23. Supposedly, if everything went well because of these efforts, this should be 23,000. But it's not. It's only 19,000. So that means there is a work in process end of 4,000. Even if this is question mark, we all know that it is 23,000 logically. Okay? So in this work in process, the direct materials are 50% complete already. And both the direct labor and factory overhead, it's 40% complete. So this is 40% completed as if, or converted, because these two, again, are conversion costs. Okay? And then the question is, what is the cost of this completed and transferred, and what is the cost of the work in process end, which is blank here, but we already know that that is 4,000. Okay? So, how do we solve for that? First off, before we do anything else, I would like to introduce you to the concept of EUP, equivalent units of production. So, as to how are you going to um, allocate these costs plus these costs to the finished goods and work in process end, that is always based on the equivalent units of production. What does that mean? So if we talk about completed and transferred, we all know that it is 100% complete as to direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Otherwise, it would not be labeled as completed and transferred, right? So if there is a completed and transferred, such as in this problem, we have 19,000. We all know that the equivalent unit of production of that one is 19,000. Okay? How about work in process end? If there is a work in process end, like in this example, we have 4,000. You cannot say that its EUP or equivalent units of production is 4,000. Why? It's because it's not 100% complete. So for example, it's only 50% complete. So 4,000 times 50%, 2,000, that is the equivalent units of production. Okay? So I guess you already understood even if it's not explained. However, because of this concept of equivalent units of production, actually guys, instead of saying 4,000 units, but they are only 50% complete, you should say that it is as if 2,000 units that is 100% complete. Okay? So that they will be in the same standing with the completed and transferred. Okay? This is complete, this is as if complete, then you'll be able to allocate costs effectively because of the equivalent units of production. Okay? So, is it necessary? Yes, it is necessary, especially if we're going to answer this illustrative problem. Okay? Now, let's try to answer. The very first that you should do is to analyze the flow of the units. Whenever I solve for problems related to process costing, I would try to analyze the units through a T account. Analysis of flow of units. I have a different name for this one. However, I have forgotten it. So we have the analysis of flow of units. Like for example, in this problem, um, on the debit side, we have the beginning, right? Maybe we have beginning units. And yes, we have 3,000 work in process beginning. So you have 3,000 units. Okay? So since this is inventory, so the beginning is here in the debits. Again, these are flow of units only, not the amounts. Okay? Second, what will make the inventory bigger? The inventory will become bigger if ever you will start another batch. Since we are in Department 1, we have started started in process because this is the ones that were mentioned in the books, started in process. So, the started in process, which meant the units that you have started currently, it's not like that beginning inventory which was started in the previous. So, you have total to be worked on so that you can remember. So, this is your mission as a department to finish the 23,000 units, which is composed of the uncompleted in the previous year plus those that you have started currently. So, total to be worked on 23,000. So, try to finish them because again, that is the mission. Of course, you would ask about the work in process and the completed and transferred. Okay? So, for example, how much is the completed and transferred? Luckily, there is a given in the problem. So that's 19,000. And then there is no mention about the loss. So that means if this is 23,000, you have to copy it in the credit. So to be accounted for and as accounted, so 23,000, 19,000 was completed and transferred. And then, of course, the ending is 4,000. Something like that. To be accounted as accounted. Yeah, I chose the right simplification. So you have to find where are these, and then you have to justify where did they go. Okay? Now, again, in the next problems, there would be sometimes that there will be a loss here, loss units. So that would be later. Okay? So actually, that's the first one that I will do whenever I allocate the costs, the current cost as well as the cost of this work in process. Okay? Now, next. The next step, if this is step 1, and if you're already confident that you have accounted for what is to be accounted, you go to step 2, which is you have to put the conditions. So normally, I would only put the conditions of the completed and transferred for EUP purposes because that would be the next and the ending inventory. In this particular example that we have, those are the ones that we need. But in the next, you will need to have the conditions of the work in process beginning. So let's put that now so that you will get used to it. Okay. However, in this particular computation, it's not yet needed. Okay. So again, I will put the condition of the work in process beginning if it is not yet needed because in the future you will need to get the condition of that. So the condition meant um, the work done in the past period. That's the condition that I'm talking about related to work in process beginning. And according to here, as to materials, that is already 30% complete. As to labor, that is already 35% complete. And as to factory overhead, that is also 35% complete. Okay? And then, this one, no need to ask. The direct materials here is 100% complete. Labor, 100% complete. And factory overhead, it's 100% complete. Because again, it will not be labeled as completed and transferred if ever it is not complete as to materials and the conversion costs. Lastly, we have the ending, the working process end. According to the problem, as to materials, that is already 50% complete. As to direct labor and factory overhead, that is 40% complete. And factory overhead here is 40% complete. Okay? So that's the step 2. Putting on the work done in each of the types of the units. For the beginning inventory, the work done in the past period. In here, the work done at the end of the current period. Okay? And in the future, let me tell you that if there is a loss, sometimes there are already work done for that loss. Okay? For this particular episode, we're not going to include first the losses so that it will not be very difficult for you. So you have to familiarize first the step 1, which is the analysis of flow of units, as well as the, what do you call this? The conditions or the work done in each of the groups of units. The work in process end, the work in process beginning, as well as the completed and transferred. Okay? What's the next step? Step 3 is all about EUP. Computation of EUP. I don't know if the books are doing this, but I'm definitely doing it like this. Example, I'll put here the direct materials, the direct labor, and the factory overhead. And then, I will put in the, so meaning, this is for rows. For columns, I put there the different types of units as accounted for. Like, I put there the completed and transferred, as well as the work in process and I compute the EUP for each. Example, on the direct materials, how much, when we talk about completed and transferred, how much is the percentage of completion as to materials of this 19,000? It's 100%. So that means the EUP for, or the equivalent units of production for direct materials as to completed and transferred, it's 19,000. That's 19,000 times 100%. And this one also is 19,000. And this one also is 19,000. That's it. As to the working process end, that is 4,000. We cannot put the 4,000 here in the EUP because again, 4,000 is only 50% complete as to material. So meaning, you have to, 4,000 times 50%, you have 2,000 only. And then, as to labor and factory overhead, I might need my calculator for this one. Yeah, got it. So, you have, what's that? 4,000, but only 40% complete. So, we have 1,600. So, that's EUP. So, 19,000 plus 2,000, that's 21,000. So, what is the meaning of this? If ever we are talking about direct material costs, so we have here 400,000 as the current cost and the direct materials for the work in process beginning 22,500. Because again, direct materials was already introduced to these units because it has been partially completed in the previous year. So the total materials is 422,500. So when you allocate that 422,500, you have to allocate it in 21,000 units. That's the meaning and the usage of the EUP. Okay? But that's later. I just explained how EUP is necessary in allocating. Okay? The costs. So we have 21,000 and we have here 20,600 units and 20,600. So that's the EUP. Now, let's talk about the costs. So, aside from the EUP, you will have costs. You can call it, step 4, costs. And that's what I'm gonna do again. DM, DL, and factory overhead. On the EUP, I started with this one, until this one. In these costs, we will start in the end. Okay? So, what we did earlier, we got the total direct materials, the current direct materials, as well as the direct material costs that were applied to the work in process beginning in the past period. And again, that is 400,000 plus 22,500. You have 422,500. That's it. Okay? Now, again, I told you a while ago, what is the use of this EUP? This 422,500 will be allocated to that EUP. So, divided by 21,000, 422,500, divided by 21,000 units, you have 20.119. So, let's have 3 decimal places for that one. So, is this necessary? Yes, that's necessary. I guess we have to allocate that already so that you will see. So meaning, of the total 422,500 cost for direct materials, which is allocated to 21,000, so each unit we have 20.119 per unit. And as you can see in the completed and transferred, there is 19,000. So meaning, this amount, 20.119 times 19,000, that is 382,262 if we are going to round it off. So, if ever, since there are only two groups of inventories as accounted, the completed and transferred as well as the work in process end, so that meant 422,500 minus the share of the completed and transferred, which is 382,262, will have, for the work in process end, 40,238. Oh. So, you have already allocated the direct materials based on the total direct material cost, which is composed again of the current direct materials plus the direct material cost that were applied to work in process beginning in the past period, 422,500. You divide that with the EUP, or the equivalent units of production, and you will get the cost per EUP. And then you call this, allocate it based on the EUPs of each of the group. Okay? It's like having a fraction only that is the numerator, and then this is the denominator. This is the numerator for the working process, and then this is the denominator. Something like that. Okay? Now, next, again, let's repeat the process. As to direct labor, you will start with 750,000 as the cost for direct labor. And then you add, of course, the direct labor costs that were applied to the work in process beginning. And you will have 750,000 plus 47,000. You will have 797,000. 797,000 as the total direct labor cost should be allocated to 20,600 units based on this one. So what will happen? 797,000 divided by 20,600, we have 38.689. 38.689. So in our example, and in the problems that you will encounter in the future, these answers here might be 21. Like there are no decimals because most of the makers of the problems are actually making the solution first, so that if they wanted this to be 21, this could be 21, and then they are going to work back and make the problem. Okay? In here, we are straightforward, making the problem as realistic as possible. Because in the actual workplace, of course, there will be some points, decimals. Okay? So I hope you will not be surprised if ever you answer in some problems, in reviewers, if ever you are. So, let's say 38.689. Let's go back. So, what is the weight for the completed and transferred? The EUP is 19,000 also. 38.689 times 19,000, we have 735 was allocated to 091, was allocated to 735,091 is allocated to completed and transferred. So out of the 797,000 minus 735,091, the work in process end is 61,909. Don't get me wrong. You can always have 38.689 for the work in process times 1/6. You can have that. That's 61,902.4. However, you will not be able to get this 797,000 intact in here. It's because of rounding of factors. Because actually, there are no these are not only three decimals. There are a lot of decimals that follows. So I have rounded that off, and in order for me to sum this up at 797 later on, so what I did is 797 minus this, the remainder will be on the work in process end. But you can actually have 38.689 times 1/6 for the work in process end. Okay? We're clear on that? Okay. Let's go to factory overhead. Let's repeat the same process. Factory overhead is 450,000 plus 28,200. So I should have put it right here. 450,000 plus 28,200. We have 478,200 divided by 2,600 also. This one. 478,200 divided by 23.21. 4. Something like that. 23.214. So what we're going to do is 23.214 times the EUP for completed and transferred, 441,066. Again, you could always do 23.214 times 1/6, but then again, I'm not sure if ever the 2 that you will get, if you sum it up, it will become 478,200. So, in order to be sure, I just have 478,200 minus 441,066, and we will have 37,134. Okay? Now, what will happen next? You just have to add the costs. So the allocation for completed and transferred as to direct materials is 382,262 plus 735,091 plus 441,066. And you will have 155,8419. And then 14,238 plus 61,909 plus 37,134, we have 139,281. Yeah. So that's the work in process end. So this is work in process end, and this is completed and transferred. So meaning, to be accounted for is actually, you add all those costs. Like, your question is, 400,000 plus 750,000 plus 450,000 plus 22,500 plus 47,000 here plus 28,200. We have 1,697,700. The to be accounted for, which is these costs and these costs. The question is, where did they go? Of course, we can already answer that this 1,697,000, actually that's the total here, 1,697,700 is allocated 1,558,419 to the completed and transferred, and the remainder 139,281 is, what do you call this? Allocated to the work in process end. And then, since there is a work in process end, this is the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. In the subsequent period, for example, we're talking about next period for this department one, this will become the work in process beginning. So again, this will become the work in process beginning. 4,000, that is the, what do you call this? Application rate for materials, labor, and factory overhead. Okay? And these are the costs. As if this one, this is our work in process beginning now, right? The work in process beginning of the department one in the next period will be this work in process end of 4,000, and that those are the percentages, and these are the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead that were applied today. Okay? Or in this current period. So that's as simple as that. So you've learned about how to allocate using EUP. Okay? So I will make this video short. We'll talk about complications in the next video. So our next topic would be, what if we are in Department 2 already? Okay? So we will add some things here for the Department 2, because we have already the completed and transferred, or the transferred out cost. It's as if that 1,558,419 will be transferred out to Department 2, and we are going to add what are the direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead for Department 2 in the next episode. Okay? So here we have Department 1 with no loss. Okay? Next video, we're going to have Department 2 with no loss also, before we go to losses. Okay? So thank you for watching, and see you on the next one.